Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. In the studio with me is Charles Sauer, libertarian economist and president of the Market Institute. MarketInstitute.org is the website. You can tweet him at Charles Sauer, spelled S-A-U-E-R. Charles, welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. So let's talk about the debt ceiling and government debt in general. It seems to me like a libertarian who actually understands economics would agree with me on these issues.
Okay.
And my position is as follows: that number one, the whole debt ceiling is just it's a made-up canard. It was made up during the Eisenhower administration. It wasn't considered controversial at the time, but it's stupid to say we're not going to pay the debts already incurred, the obligations already incurred by the federal government. So if you want to prevent the debt from growing by statute, there are other and different ways to do it, number one. And number two, that the national debt is private savings. That there's about $4.5 trillion of our national debt that the government owes to itself, but the remaining 15 trillion of it, most of that, or much of that, is private savings. Well, it's George W. Bush, when he was born, he had $1 million in government bonds. And the sturm and drang that has been coming about our national debt has mostly been coming from Pete Peterson and people like him, a Wall Street billionaire, who are looking at $15 trillion of personal savings. If I said personal debt, I meant savings. Yeah. $15 trillion of personal savings being put in the Treasury Department as Treasury bills, yep, rather than at Goldman Sachs or at Pete Peterson's bank, whatever it's called. And they're just saying, hey, we want this money because we can skim the money off the top, and we're going to get everybody all hysterical about the national debt, when the fact of the matter is that any country that absolutely has control over their own currency, debt is the last thing they need to worry about. And if anything proves this, it's Japan. So let me turn it over to you, Charles.
I guess it's the best bad ideas are rooted in a little bit of truth, right? So I do agree with parts of what you're saying. I mean, the fact is it is a canard. It's a false limit. So we all have credit cards, and they have limits. And those credit card limits are real. If you hit it, the credit card company will stop you. But I think of the debt ceiling like a credit card limit. It's just the fact that Congress can raise the limit, or if it wasn't there, there would be no limit. But
hang on just a second. Yeah. It's a really imperfect metaphor, because when you go to use your credit card, that's when you're incurring the debt. So if we were to walk across the street to Brown Bag and buy lunch, and your credit card is already maxed out, yep, they will not let you buy the lunch.
Yes.
Right? Whereas what Congress is saying is, with the whole debt ceiling, what the Republicans are saying is, yeah, we get it. The government's already bought the lunch, right? They've already, yep, run up the bill. We're now not going to send the check into the credit card company at the end of the month to pay this month's bill.
It's a little bit different than that, because you're right. They're saying they're not going to
pay a bill that has already been incurred.
And every time the Republicans have tried to put a stop in other areas, it's been held back. So this is the one way. But the debt ceiling says,
it hasn't been held back.
That they're not going to pay the bill, but it doesn't say they're going to not pay all the bills, and that's what the left likes portraying this as. It says we're going to organize what bills we're going to pay first. It's kind of like a bankruptcy.
We've been doing that since March.
But again, even at that, they aren't actually. We've always raised the debt ceiling. It might have been on a delay.
I know, under Newt back in the 90s during the Clinton administration, they shut down the government. It's happened three times maybe.
Well, it also shut down under Obama, right? Under President Obama, they government went and ran like safety tape around some of the kids' parks in Washington D.C.
Right.
Arbitrarily, just to
it's a great way to make the point.
To make the point that it was happening, but they kept the regular functions of government.
But the reason why Republicans are willing to shut down the government at that level, is because that allows them to continue voting for another $600 billion for the defense industry and not appropriating the funds for it.
No, that's why I think the debt ceiling is good on both sides, right? So I don't think it's good that the Republicans keep voting to increase defense spending. I think it's important that we talk about spending. I think it's important that we bring responsibility back to spending.
Shouldn't that conversation happen at the moment that the Republicans are voting on legislation to do the spending?
You know, like with my wife, it happens in our family when we do the spending and when we pay the bills.
See, your family cannot print its own currency.
Yeah, and just because, since the government can print its own currency, not only should they talk about it when they pass the bills, but they should talk about it when they pay the bills, and they should talk about it in between. And the fact that we just happen to have rules there for them, the problem comes in because they can print their own currency. You can't. What if a bank, the way that you attack banks, you should be on the side, because if banks could print their own currency,
we'd be screwed.
Yeah, right. But the government can print its own money, and you think that that's great? That's not great.
Actually, as you know, our money supply is not increased by the government. Mostly, it's increased by banks lending money. That's how money gets into the money supply. That's how the money supply gets expanded. Banks, put loans on their balance sheets, and it's how it gets contracted. Banks stop lending, as we saw in 2008. There was about a $4 trillion change, as I recall, in the U.S. money supply over about a 2-year period. But
I just hosted an event last night with the president of the St. Louis Fed. We talked about some of these issues, and it was an off-the-record meeting. He didn't say anything that would blow the boots off of anybody, as any Fed president would do. But the fact is you're kind of right, but you play a little fast and loose with the variables there. The banks, our central bank can do things that makes us feel like we increase the money supply.
Yeah, and they do that by buying government debt, or buying bad bank debt, which they're still sitting on trillions of dollars worth. And you and I both disagree with that as a matter of policy.
Yeah.
But my point is that the whole debt ceiling thing is a scam put together by Republicans so that they can scream about spending money, but they don't get restrained in their own spending of money.
I completely agree with that. I think that the debt ceiling's a scam, but it's a good scam that both parties should use. The liberals,
Why?
The liberals should yell at the Republicans
for not raising taxes,
for their defense spending, or for not raising taxes. It should be used by both sides. I don't think that raising taxes is the solution, but when you have something like the debt ceiling that brings up the discussion about spending. This is a family that won't talk about it.
Yeah, why even put it, though, in the context of the debt? I mean, you keep using these householder metaphors, and I keep saying, no, the government is not a household. But if you want to use the household metaphor,
okay,
there's a formula the banks use to say, okay, if your income is $30,000 a year, you can buy a house that's worth $120,000.
Yes.
It's 4 times your income or 5 times. I don't know what the exact formula is, but it's multiples of your income. Let's say it's 4 times your income. So we'll loan you enough money to buy a $130,000 house if you make $30,000 a year, or $120,000 house. Our national debt is about equal to our annual income. So if banks were lending to us, they would loan us 4 times what we owe right now as a government. And that's just to buy a house. And so if we were to say, and the whole point of buying the house is, hey, it's useful, it's functional, it's going to increase in value over time, it's going to add to the wealth of the family. Well, what does that for governments? Infrastructure. So why doesn't the government borrow $2 trillion tomorrow morning? I mean, this is not unlike, hey, you're gonna borrow money to expand your house, and you know that you're increasing the value of your house. It's going to be increased more than it costs you. It's going to pay back over time. Why shouldn't we borrow $2 trillion tomorrow and put 1 million people to work and bring America back to where it was in 1980 when Reagan came into power and stopped spending money on infrastructure?
Because the example that you gave is actually what drove the subprime lending problem. It's not you were talking about because our income is getting closer to our debt. And the fact is you shouldn't loan to somebody when they're in that situation. You need to have a ceiling space. You need to be able to actually afford the house. So it needs to be should be a fourth.
No, but what you're talking about is the annual payments on the national debt, not the debt itself.
Yeah, well,
because you're not going to say to somebody who's making $30,000 a year and has a $120,000 house, your payments of $300 a month on your home mortgage. That's terrible. You shouldn't be paying that.
I'm also not going to sit here and fight that debt itself is bad. There's plenty of academics who have said that debt is good or debt is okay. And the fact is
a useful lubricant.
if we have $1 trillion in debt now, and somehow we hold that debt even, I'm not saying we have to hold it where it is, but the economy keeps growing, that $1 trillion starts becoming a smaller and smaller percent. So I'm not even saying that there's a level of debt that we should hold. What I am saying, though, is that this is a good conversation to have. The debt ceiling helps bring up that conversation. So is the debt ceiling a canard? Is it fake? Has it been used as a political baseball bat? Oh, yes. Has it been used more effectively by the right as a political baseball bat? Yes. The left should learn how to wield the debt ceiling baseball bat.
Except that requires the left to buy into the canard. In other words, you're saying, why don't you guys fight inside our frame? And I'm saying, I think the frame is BS.
That's inside the family. There's a lot of different people that find ways to get outside of a conversation, to not address the hard issues. And the debt ceiling is a way to bring up the hard issues. And whether that's a canard or not, I don't think that's a problem.
Why not have that conversation instead of throwing it into this phony frame of debt? Why not put it into the frame of national priorities? You know, when the federal government is putting together their annual budget, and they're doing these giant must-pass omnibus bills, which I think absolutely should be outlawed. Isn't that the appropriate time for this conversation? Do you really want to spend this money to Martin Lockheed, whatever it is? It's
don't bring an economic fight to a moral argument, right?
Why not?
The fact is when you're spending money, that's this. The left can usually win because there's no moral argument that's going to win versus taking care of this additional person who needs help. But when you're talking about the debt and spending, now that's a moral argument that can be used on the right, because now the spending is being taken out of my kids and my kids' pockets instead of the idea that you want to pursue somebody.
I know that cliche promoted by Peterson and friends, but the fact of the matter is your kids and your kids' paying off the national debt is no worse than you and I right now paying taxes to pay off the debt from World War II.
No, I shouldn't be paying the debt from World War II either. I mean, that because we keep
World War II, actually, it's probably more Vietnam. Anyhow, Charles, we're out of time. We're wrapping it up. Charles Sauer, marketinstitute.org is his website. You can tweet him at Charles Sauer, SAUER. We'll be ready. Charles, thank you.